Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Today our program is in English. This is our weekly discourse with Dr. Zafar Bangash, the director of the Institute of Contemporary Islamic Thought. Welcome to the program, Dr. Zafar Bangash.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu, and my salams to your viewers and listeners as well.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you very much for joining Dr. Bangash. Dr. Bangash, we are going to be discussing the rapidly changing developments in Syria today. And I think the big question that everyone has on their minds is what's going on in Syria today, and what are the implications of the developments in Syria that's happened in the last 2 weeks and going forward for all the countries in the Middle East and West Asia, including countries like Pakistan. So this is our basic core discussion that we want to do today. And before that, if it's okay with you, I've put together a collage that reflects different aspects of the situation. And in the next couple of minutes, show that to you, and then we have our discussion. Is that okay with you, sir?
Absolutely. Please go ahead. Yes.
So the interesting thing is there are very diverse views, and one is this Cradle, the American newspaper media outlet. It says that Abu Muhammad al-Julani is rebranding and remarketing as a great savior is like putting lipstick on a pig. So this is all a fraud. This guy was a terrorist. His organization was a terrorist. It's killed hundreds of thousands of people, slaughtered people. And now because they are working on behalf of U.S. interests and Israeli interests, they're trying to rebrand and remarketing. So that's one context that we want to discuss today. The other is really very significant, tragic as well, and that is the launch of continuous launch of airstrikes against Syria. The number is now exceeded, I understand, 500. Some people say it is close to 550. 550 airstrikes have been done by the Israeli Air Force, and they have now permanently taken over the Golan Heights, and they said that we are now going to settle Israelis. So that's the second context of what's happening in vis-a-vis Israel. The third is an interesting about the Mr. Lipstick on a Pig's government's response to what is going on in Syria. And I just want to share that with you. This is a government minister being asked about the Israeli airstrikes. Let's hear this.
First, all media must shed light on this Syrian tragedy.
Can I get your reaction to these Israeli airstrikes? We've had over 300 now.
Our priority is to restore security and services, to revive civilian life in institutions, and care for newly liberated cities. There are many urgent parts of day-to-day life to restore: bakeries, electricity, water, communications. So our priority is to provide those services to the people.
I understand it's not your priority, but are you honestly telling me that you have nothing to say about Israel striking 300 sites in this country?
Have no doubt, we want everyone to respect the sovereignty of the new Syria. This point is very important to us.
So this is how Mr. Lipstick on his pig and his government is responding to what's happening. And then we have what's going on in the U.S. Regarding. So the interesting thing here is that Anthony Blinken, confirms that the United States is in direct contact with HTS, the former terrorist organization on which there is a terrorist label, on which Mr. Lipstick on his pig Julani has a prize money on him for $10 million. So that's an interesting thing, that we are direct in contact with him. So that's the other aspect of the collage. And now we come to all those who are part of this interesting deal which is the 8 Arab countries who vow to support peaceful transition process and perhaps will have, as you will, I hope we'll discuss later, will have the most significant impact of the outfall or the fallout of what's happening in Syria today. And they've said we will rebuild peaceful transition process. It's Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Lebanon, Egypt, the UAE, Bahrain, and Qatar. So that's what the region is doing. And then we have a very opposing, contrarian view about the role of Iran and the axis of resistance. So here is Rashid Khalidi, who's a well-known commentator on Middle Eastern affairs. This is what he has to say.
Well, I don't think the Assad regime was an ally of the Palestinians. I was in Beirut when the Syrian army intervened against the PLO in 1976, when it helped the Lebanese forces to capture and slaughter the population of Tel Zafar, when many Palestinians were kidnapped and killed by the Syrian regime. Friend of the Palestinians, excuse me? I mean, with friends like this, you don't need enemies. And that leads me to something that other people have said, that this has led to the collapse of the so-called axis of resistance. Well, there was an axis. Who created the axis and what purpose was it created for? It was essentially created by Iran as a deterrent to protect the Iranian regime and the Iranian nation state for to protect Iranian national interests. That was what their alliance with Syria was for. That was what their support of Hezbollah was for. That was what their support of Hamas was for. And that's why they support Ansar Allah, the so-called Houthis in Yemen. Each of those actors had a degree of independence. They weren't Syrian clones or Iranian clones or controlled by Iran. But Iran supported them and massively supported them at a huge cost. $30 billion that the Iranian people would love to have had back were loaned to Syria. They'll never see that money. They did it for the interest of the regime and the interest of Iran. They've created deterrents to protect Iran against American hostility and hostility of regimes in the Middle East. And that had in my view, no connection to a Palestinian national interest. It may have served some Palestinian factions. It may have helped in this way or that way for this or that Palestinian interest, but it wasn't designed, this so-called axis of resistance, to liberate Palestine or to help the Lebanese liberate the bits of South Lebanon that Israel controls along the Mount Hermon frontier with Lebanon. It was intended to protect Iran. And it disappeared, and Iran is more vulnerable, and that may be a good or bad thing. It has nothing to do with the Palestinians, in my view, my personal view. I honestly never believed that there was such a thing as an axis of resistance. There was an axis of protection for Iran, and it served that purpose until Israel showed it was in. Well, I don't think the Assad.
So, sir, that's the whole context. I think it was an interesting montage to see different aspects of the situation. And so, back to the question: what's going on in Syria today, and what are the implications for the Middle East and West Asian countries? Sir.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. You have given a very, very broad perspective of what's taking place in Syria and the various opinions, etc. Let us start off with inside Syria. Already there are reports that various minority groups are being targeted despite promises by Mr. Al-Jolani, this rebranded pig with lipstick, as you know, the Cradle so aptly put it, because as you mentioned, I'd like to make a correction in that HTS wasn't formerly the terrorist organization. It is still is a terrorist organization on the UN list, the US list, the European list, although they are desperately trying to rebrand it. For instance, the Telegraph, the British newspaper Telegraph, which is a Zionist-owned telegraph, they even described him as a diversity-friendly, revolutionary. And I think
like the LGBTQ exactly. friendly. Oh,
exactly.
Wow.
Very soon, very soon he might even declare that he is gay. We don't know. So these are the people who in 2014, 15, all the way up to 2024, they were chopping people's heads. They were, eating people's organs, and now they're telling us that they are, diversity friendly and so on. So I think, this rebranding is taking place. What this indicates is that HTS and all of these various, groups that are in it, there are about 33 groups under HTS umbrella. Since they are America's creation, they are Israel's creation, they are serving their interests. So now America is trying to rebrand them, and the West is trying to rebrand them. There was a very interesting comment made by Craig Whiteside. He's of the U.S. Naval War College. He referred to that Buqa prison camp in Iraq, where all of these people, Al-Jolani, and before that, Al-Baghdadi, and many others were kept for about 5-6 years and then released. He referred to the Buqa prison camp as America's Jihadi University. And in 2009, America released 5,700 of them and unleashed them in Iraq so that they would create havoc over there. Some of them, of course, went to Syria. So what we are seeing today in Syria is all of these people trained, financed, armed by the US, by Israel, by Turkey, and also by these Arab regimes, whether it is Qatar, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, etc. All of these criminal regimes are involved in it, and they wanted to overthrow Bashar al-Assad's regime, not because Bashar al-Assad was a dictator. Of course he was. But I mean, is the Saudi, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman democratically elected? Is Abdul Fattah Sisi in Egypt democratically elected? Is the King of Jordan democratically elected? What about the rulers of UAE or Qatar? These are family fiefdoms. So it's not actually dictators that the US is opposed to. Assad's crime was that he had joined the axis of resistance against Israel. And that's a no-go area. That's a sin that they will not forgive. And it's also actually part of Zionist strategy outlined by Netanyahu as early as 1995 or 1996 through his Zionist allies in the United States. I want to share with you a particular episode. General Wesley Clark, who at the time of 9/11, he used to be the NATO commander based he's an American general, but based in Brussels. He, in an interview on March the 7th of 2007 with Democracy Now!, he revealed in that interview with Amy Goodman that soon after 9/11, about a week or 10 days after 9/11, he went to the Pentagon to see his boss, who was, of course, Donald Rumsfeld. And after he came down from there, from the top floor, he said on the floor below, one of the generals, he said, who used to work under me, he rushed out of his office and came to me and said, "Sir, you have to come and see this." And so I went to his office and he showed me a piece of paper which has the names of 7 countries on it. And at the top of the list was Iraq. I said, "What is this?" He said, "Well, they have decided," that means, the Pentagon and the American establishment under George Bush, that they have decided to attack Iraq. So he said, I asked them, have they found any linkage between Iraq and the 9/11 attackers? They said, no, there's nothing like that. And he said, then why do they want to attack Iraq? He said, well, they don't know what else to do. And then he said that they have listed these 7 countries, and I'm going to give you the names of those 7 countries that they want to take down. That means that they want to destroy. So what are these 7 countries? Iraq, you have Lebanon, Libya, Sudan, Somalia, Syria, and Iran. Okay, so look at the 7 countries that I mentioned to you that General Wesley Clark had mentioned. You look at all of the countries. Syria was the latest country. Of course, they tried it in 2011. They didn't succeed, but ultimately in 2024, they succeeded. So you see that all of these countries, Iraq, Sudan, Libya, Syria.
Let me just play the excerpt from this interview. Very interesting.
That'd be great.
Syria, Lebanon, in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran. I said, is it classified? He said, yes, sir. I said, well, don't show it to me.
That this is absolutely amazing.
Look at this. Look at everything that was said back. I mean, he said this was mentioned to him in 2011, September of 2011. Step by step, the Americans are, fulfilling it. Of course, as I said, in Syria in 2011, when they started, unlike Libya, they didn't succeed in Syria immediately because, of course, Syria's friends came to Syria's rescue. But, they didn't give up. They just continued. I think one of the things we need to keep in mind is that Western regimes, particularly the United States and Israel, if they fail at one time, it doesn't mean that they will give up that particular project. They just keep on working on it. They come around from the other side. They keep on working. And this is how we see the result of what is happening in Syria. Let me also say about Syria, you showed the Guardian's, headline that Israel has carried out more than 500 airstrikes against Syria. Okay, now they have destroyed virtually the entire air force fleet of Syria. They have destroyed military infrastructure of Syria. They have destroyed the naval vessels of Syria. So today,
and the scientific, all research laboratories.
Exactly, research laboratories. Even they've killed even Syrian scientists in Damascus. They've killed them. And Israel has occupied large parts of Syria, especially along its borders. So the Golan Heights, Mount Hermon, and then they have moved towards Daraa, and they are Israeli newspapers themselves are reporting Times of Israel, etc., that the Israeli army and tanks are about 25 kilometers outside Damascus. In fact, yesterday, the Israeli channel I-24 News, which is of course financed by the Israeli Foreign Ministry, their representative was in Damascus, reporting directly from Damascus. Okay, and nobody said anything to them. Everybody knew that this is an Israeli channel. The Israelis are roaming around over there, and they showed. And of course, they just had. I could see that in the background, the number of people that were supposedly celebrating was very small. It wasn't a huge number. It was a very small number. And yet, they would pick up one individual and say, oh, we are so happy that Bashar al-Assad is gone and we are free and we're going to have democracy, etc., etc. They're not going to have any democracy. Head choppers are not in the business of providing democracy. And we will soon find that these groups are going to start fighting among themselves. So for all practical purposes, unfortunately, Syria as a state is gone. It is completely finished. There will be no Syria. And the larger picture is, unfortunately, that Israel has a plan for establishing Greater Israel. If anybody has seen the maps, on the Israeli parliament building, Knesset, it says from the Euphrates to the Nile. That means that their plan is that they're going to create this Greater Israel, which would stretch from the Euphrates in Iraq to the Nile River in Egypt. And it includes not only Syria, Lebanon, and Syria. Of course, Palestine is completely gone, but it will also include parts of Iraq. It will also include parts of Saudi Arabia and parts of Egypt. This is the plan that they have. And these people in Syria and their friends and allies are celebrating that, this is a great achievement that we have got rid of a dictator. I mean, this is insane when I think about it, when I look at the stupidity. I have to use this word. I don't call it innocence. It's stupidity of the Muslims, not only the Muslim masses, but even their leaders and their intellectuals. It is mind-boggling that they don't see what they are doing. There is an expression in English. It says, you cut your nose to spite your face. And that's what they have done in Syria. They've removed Bashar al-Assad because they hated him so much, because he was part of the axis of resistance. And it is just unbelievable. I mean, of course, if you want to jump in and add anything, otherwise I'd like to go to.
So yes, I do actually. So we know that Syria is finished. We know there's Greater Israel project. We know the U.S. was behind this terrorist organization, HTS, we know they were behind Al Qaeda, Daesh. We know they have this plan to completely redraw the maps of the Middle East, blood borders, including Pakistan. So we know all that. So my question to you is, what will so how do you see this happening? Say, if I were to fast forward a year from now or 2 years from now, do we see the redrawing of borders of the existing Middle Eastern countries to some extent, going towards this greater Israeli project, or the redrawing of borders like blood borders? Project yourself a couple of years forward and help us understand what you see.
First of all, what I see in Syria in particular is that these various groups will start to fight each other. That is in America's interest. That is in Israel's interest. They want them involved so that whatever Israel and America want to do, that these people will be so engrossed in their own fights that they would have no time to pay attention to what's going on around them. So Israel is likely to continue to move further into Syria. It will surround Damascus and leave these terrorist groups to fight it out in Damascus. Israel does not need to move its forces into Damascus, but I think it will continue to move towards the north. I mean, there's a whole vast stretch of the Syrian desert. They will just bypass that because there isn't too much population there. But what is going to happen in the north of Syria is that Aleppo would be occupied by Turkey, and then you would have this SDF, the Syrian Democratic Force, which is basically Kurdish-led. America is backing them. America would give that area, to cut off that chunk of Kurdish territory, or not Kurdish territory, but Kurdish inhabited territory, which is also incidentally rich in oil and water and food production. So basically, the most productive area of Syria would be occupied by American as well as American-backed terrorist outfits. So that's the scenario for Syria. For the rest of the West Asian region, obviously, they won't move so fast. They will continue to go incrementally, because if they move too fast, obviously, this is going to create problems for them. Although they can do it. I mean, if they want to cut off parts of, let's say, Saudi Arabia or Egypt, etc., those regimes can't do anything. But the more likely scenario that I see is that within the next year or couple of years, that these terrorist groups would then be moved to Iraq, because you see, their ultimate objective is to destroy Iran, because they see Iran as the main source of resistance to them. So if they move into Iraq, obviously this would pose a major challenge to Iran. And that is what I see would likely be the scenario. So Iraq is likely to be the next area that they would move into. And of course, I'm sure that Iran is well aware of it. I'm sure they have made contingency plans, and they would do whatever it takes to defend themselves. In fact, I feel, given the developments, I think it is now really, really urgent for Iran to revise its nuclear doctrine and to go for the nuclear weapon. I know it may not be popular to say, but I think that's the only way that Iran can defend itself, not to use a nuclear weapon, but to use it as a deterrent against the enemies that are hell-bent on destroying Iran and overthrowing the Islamic government in Iran.
So that's a very, very clear roadmap that you have chalked out. They're moving towards Iraq and what's happening in Syria. When I look at the greater Israeli map, it's just unbelievable what the Saudis can be so ignorant. And this is, from Middle East market. I mean, literally, they've taken over Saudi Arabia. They just left the Rabb al Khali there. And Saudi Arabia is part of Greater Israel. All these emirates and everything is gone. Syria is gone. Half of Iraq is gone. Parts of Egypt are gone. So what is Saudi thinking that the policemen, the world's policemen, the USA will come and defend them if something like this happens? I will not let this happen.
You see, these people are so stupid that they don't realize that they think that just because we will appease Israel, we will appease the US, that they will then not say anything to us. That's not how the world functions. You know, America is absolutely determined to dominate that region because it has, of course, a rivalry with the with Russia and with China, and it wants to keep those two powers out of this region. And so these stupid Arab rulers, I mean, you know, it's so sad that they think that they will then be saved by by the Americans, or the Israelis won't say anything to them. It's just like, you know, a pigeon when it sees a cat and it closes its eyes.
The ostrich as well.
Exactly, like an ostrich, they put their head in the sand. You know, that's what they are doing. They will not survive. The only way for them to survive is if these regimes, whether in Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Iraq, of course, is aligned with Iran to a considerable extent. If these regimes were to align themselves with Iran and to put up a strong front, because they will have financial clout. Egypt has a fairly powerful military. Iran has a great military, and as well as great missile power. And if that is augmented by their nuclear deterrence, I think then this greater Israel project can be put in check. Otherwise, I'm afraid the future looks extremely grim.
And the likelihood of Egypt and Saudi Arabia doing what you've just suggested is, at the moment, looks fairly remote.
Unfortunately, yes, because you see, these regimes don't have any support of their masses, so they are relying on outside powers. But those
like Pakistan.
Exactly. Unfortunately, just like Pakistan, you see, unless and until a regime or a government has the support of its people, it cannot succeed. On December the 16th, it would be the 53rd anniversary of that humiliating surrender in Dhaka. Which occurred in 1971. Yes. But the seeds of that surrender were planted in March of 1971, when General Yahya Khan refused to respect the wishes of the people and hand over power to the democratically elected people. And of course, he was, so arrogant. He thought that he can, crush these Bengalis. They had contempt for them instead of respecting their wishes. And we know the consequences of that. For them, this humiliating surrender was preferable to accepting the wishes of the people. It is so tragic. It is so sad. And unfortunately, a similar situation is continuing and evolving in Pakistan today as well. But I also want to come to what Professor Rashid Khalidi had said.
Yes, I wanted to address that.
He's a well-known academic, etc. But I'm so saddened by the way he sort of, presented his arguments. First of all, he's talking about a situation. He said that, Syrian army went into Lebanon in 1976. Of course, it was Bashar al-Assad's father, Hafiz al-Assad. Bashar al-Assad was a young man. He was still studying in England. He was not, involved in this because he became the president in the year 2000. Anyway, we need to keep in mind that Lebanon actually used to be part of Syria. Okay, so it was the French who split it up because the British and the French, when they destroyed the Ottoman Empire, that they parceled out these various sort of regions, Lebanon and Jordan and Palestine, etc., because their aim was to implant the Zionist entity over there. So that's one factor. Secondly, Rashid Khalidi is referring to an event that occurred 48 years ago. I mean, surely even he knows that in 48 years things change. A lot of things change. Also, he says that, well, this is not a resistance front; it's a protection front, or etc. So what? I mean, let's ask ourselves: doesn't every country
Absolutely.
take steps to protect itself? I mean, what are these armies for then? And this is so ridiculous. But
the alignment of interests is really to protect each other.
Exactly.
If there is an alignment of interests, that's why it happens, right?
Yeah, but let me share this with you. The Islamic Revolution in Iran occurred in February of 1979. The first foreign leader who was invited to Iran was Yasser Arafat, the chairman of PLO. And there was a massive Israeli embassy in Tehran during the Shah's regime. The Israelis were kicked out of there, and the keys of that embassy were handed over to the PLO. Imam Khomeini did that. Okay, Imam Khomeini received Yasser Arafat. Okay, so at that time, Iran had, Iran could have just kept quiet. It didn't have to do anything. It didn't have any common borders with Israel. Since that time, the Americans, the Europeans, others have constantly sent messages to Iran to say, you reduce your hostility against Israel, and we will remove all the sanctions, and you can have your Islamic government in Iran. We don't care, but don't oppose Israel. Iran has paid a very heavy price for this. Hezbollah didn't exist in 1979. Hezbollah emerged in October of 1983. And I'm sure Professor Khalidi is well aware of it, that in June of 1982, when the Israelis invaded Lebanon against the PLO, they perpetrated bloodbath over there, and ultimately the Americans brokered a deal, and the PLO was flushed out of there and sent to Tunisia. And then the Israelis came and carried out a massacre in the Sabra and Shatila refugee camps. And the Israelis, of course, were right at the gates of Beirut. But in October of 1983, the Hezbollah emerged in the south of Lebanon because the Israeli army was continuing horrible oppression against the people. And there is a particular episode in October of 1983 in the town of Barjaoun. There was a procession of the Lebanese people. They're of course Shias. This is a Muharram procession, and the Israeli army fired at that procession. They killed a number of innocent people, and that is when Hezbollah emerged, because they said that we are not going to tolerate these people occupying our land. And 17 years later, in May of 2000, Hezbollah was able to drive out these Zionist terrorists out of much of their territory. And then they were in 2006, July and August of 2006, when the next war occurred, then Hezbollah drove the Zionists further away from Lebanon. In fact, all the way to the Lebanese border, with the exception of Sheba Farms. I can tell you, I have been there myself. I've seen Sheba Farms, visited from the top. I've been to Khayyam concentration camp, where the Zionists had maintained a torture camp where they were torturing people. I've seen that camp myself. I mean, I can tell you, they did horrible things over there. So you see, when people like Professor Khalidi talks about, that Iran is just simply using it, for God's sake, I mean, we expect certain amount of honesty from him. Iran has spent something like $30 to $50 billion supporting Syria to keep it within the resistance front. I'm sure it has spent many more billions of dollars in Lebanon to support Hezbollah. But today, when Syria has been broken off from that resistance front, that land route has been cut off to Lebanon, obviously it's a major setback to the resistance. So I'm not quite sure exactly what Professor Khalidi is talking about. I mean, we are need to ask him, please tell us what have your Arab regimes done? What did the PLO do? I mean, even today, the Palestinian Authority under Mahmoud Abbas, which comprises the PLO as well, they are Israel's collaborators. They are working hand in glove with the Zionists. They are paying them, and their police force is actually spying on Palestinians who are resisting the Zionists. So this is the nature. I mean, Rashid Khalidi himself is a Palestinian. He should ask himself, what are the Palestinians doing for themselves? I mean, it is a shame. It's a disgrace that he should talk like that and disregard the sacrifices that Iran has made. Look at the number of Iranian generals that have been martyred in Syria. Look at the number of Iranian generals that have been martyred in Lebanon. What the hell is this going on? I mean, doesn't Professor Khalidi know this? It is sad. It is really, truly sad that, when you have...
It clearly is trying to down... Sorry, please continue.
That have academics that run down the sacrifices of Iran, etc. Okay, so let me just sort of say this. Suppose Iran abandons all of this and says, get out of this equation. What do you think is going to happen? Israel is going to just keep marching. Nobody is there to resist Israel. It will take over Saudi Arabia. It will take over Egypt. It will take over Iraq. It will go all the way up to Turkey and even take parts of Turkey. Who's there to stop them? It will definitely take over Jordan. So is that what Professor Khalidi wants? It's a really sad situation that we have people who present such narrow and distorted view of the reality.
Thank you. This has been an incredibly enlightening conversation, Dr. Zafar Bangash. We hope better sense prevails. This is a world dominated by power, by force, by very narrow, selfish, self-centered interests. There are very few countries, and I will say very few countries like Iran, who have actually stood up for the rights of the oppressed, especially in the region. And their axis of resistance, it really put a stop to these expansionist designs of the US and the Zionists in the Middle East. Now that Syria is gone, everything is up in the air, and there is a very clear path, it seems, towards greater Israel, in which all these countries, including Saudi Arabia, who are sitting like ostriches, think that they'll be safe. So very enlightening. Thank you so much. We will meet next week, and we hope we continue this discussion on the emerging developments. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless all those who are fighting for haqq, for justice, for social justice, for truth, for the rights of the dispossessed, for the rights of the weak, for people in Palestine, for people in other parts of the world who've been under immense exploitation and who are the victims of great powers like the US and the Zionists. Thank you very much, Dr. Zafar Bangash. Wish you well and see you next week. Alhamdulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you, sir.